The coffee shop was quiet, almost empty, as the first snow of the season fell gently outside the window. Michelle sat alone in her favorite booth, a worn cup of coffee warming her hands. She looked out at the street, watching the pedestrians hurry by, bundled in coats and scarves, their laughter and chatter a distant echo to her own thoughts. The world seemed to move without her, as if she were invisible, a silent observer of a life she could never quite touch. It had been years since she had allowed herself to hope for anything more than routine. She had learned to build walls, to protect her heart from disappointment. Every failed attempt, every polite rejection had taught her the same lesson. Love wasn't meant for someone like her. And yet, despite it all, she couldn't help the longing that stirred quietly inside her, a small ember refusing to die. Michelle's reflection stared back at her from the window. She saw a woman who had once been full of dreams, now tempered by time and experience. Her hair framed her face softly, a gentle reminder of the person she had been. There was a quiet strength in her posture, an unspoken resilience that had carried her through years of solitude. She knew how to survive, how to exist without expectation, and yet sometimes she wished for something more. The bell above the coffee shop door chimed softly, and she looked up. A man had entered, tall, confident, yet carrying a subtle weariness in his steps. He scanned the room briefly, and his eyes met hers. Michelle felt a strange flutter in her chest, a sensation she hadn't felt in years. There was nothing extraordinary about him at first glance, yet something about his presence made the space around her feel suddenly warmer, more alive. He approached cautiously, and when he asked if the seat across from her was taken, she found herself nodding. Silence settled between them at first, comfortable but tentative. They were strangers, two people whose lives had been carefully separate until this moment. And yet, as they began to talk, words flowing softly like a gentle current, the distance between them started to shrink. He spoke with a quiet kindness, his voice steady and calm, carrying an unspoken understanding. Michelle listened, intrigued, her curiosity slowly replacing the caution she had worn for so long. They talked about small things at first, the weather, the little peculiarities of the cafe, a shared love for a certain type of pastry, but gradually their conversation deepened. They began to share pieces of themselves they had hidden away from the world. Stories of loneliness, of missed chances, of the silent ache of longing. Michelle felt herself opening, a door she had thought permanently closed. The man listened, truly listened, and in that listening she felt seen, recognized in a way that was almost unfamiliar. Time seemed to stretch and bend around them. Hours passed unnoticed. Snow continued to fall outside, blanketing the city in a soft, silent hush. Inside, the cafe became their small universe, a space where past regrets and future fears faded into insignificance. For the first time in years, Michelle laughed freely, her smile genuine and unguarded. It felt strange and wonderful, like stepping into sunlight after a long winter. When he finally left, there was a pause, a hesitation neither of them wanted to break. Words hung between them, heavy with unspoken possibilities. She watched him walk away, feeling an unfamiliar warmth in her chest, a hope she had almost forgotten. Perhaps, she thought, it wasn't too late. Perhaps love could find her, even now, in a quiet coffee shop on a snowy evening. And perhaps, just perhaps, this was the beginning of something she had dared only to dream about. The next morning, Michelle woke with a mixture of anticipation and anxiety. Her heart still fluttered from the previous evening's conversation, a connection she hadn't expected but desperately needed. She dressed carefully, choosing a comfortable outfit that matched her quiet confidence, and headed toward the cafe, hoping to see him again. The streets were dusted with fresh snow, and the soft crunch beneath her shoes made each step feel deliberate, each moment a prelude to possibility. When she arrived, the cafe was slightly busier than before. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee and warm pastries filled the air, and there he was, Mitchell, sitting in the same corner, his posture relaxed but attentive, scanning the room until his gaze met hers. A smile tugged at the corners of her lips. It was tentative, cautious, yet sincere, and it mirrored the one on his face. They had both been lonely, both hesitant, and yet something about this shared vulnerability drew them closer. He gestured for her to sit, and she slid into the booth, feeling the warmth of the seat beneath her and the subtle comfort of his presence across from her. Conversation flowed more easily this time, moving beyond small talk into the territory of genuine understanding. They spoke of dreams they had long shelved, of fears that had held them captive for years. Michelle shared stories she had never told anyone, memories tinged with regret but softened by time. Mitchell listened without interruption, offering a gentle smile or an empathetic nod, never judgment, only presence. As the hours passed, the cafe seemed to fade away. They were no longer two strangers meeting by chance. They were two souls recognizing each other, an unspoken bond forming with each glance, each word, each pause. Michelle found herself laughing more freely, the tension in her shoulders easing. She realized that for the first time in years, she felt seen, not just for her smile or her kindness, but for the entirety of who she was. Mitchell's presence was a mirror, reflecting her strength and her tenderness back to her, reminding her that she was worthy of love, of connection, of risk. Outside, snow continued to fall, the city muted and hushed, as if giving them this moment exclusively. When Mitchell finally checked his watch, a reluctant sigh escaped him. They were aware that the world beyond the cafe awaited, responsibilities and routines calling them back, but neither wanted to leave the cocoon they had found in each other's company. As they parted that morning, there was a lingering hesitation, a shared acknowledgement of the significance of what had begun. Neither said it aloud yet, but both felt it deeply, the promise of something meaningful, something rare, something worth embracing despite the fear. Michelle walked home with a lightness she hadn't felt in years, a small smile playing on her lips as she thought of him, of the way he had listened, of the warmth in his eyes. And in that quiet, snow-dusted morning, a fragile but undeniable truth settled in her heart. Sometimes the right person arrives not when you expect them, but precisely when you've built the courage to finally let someone in. The days that followed felt almost surreal for Michelle. Each morning she would wake with a quiet anticipation, a flutter in her chest that she had almost forgotten existed. The memory of Mitchell's gentle smile, the way he listened without judgment, and the warmth in his voice lingered, coloring her routine with a sense of possibility. It was as if the world had shifted slightly, allowing space for hope to grow where once there had been only solitude. Their meetings became ritualistic, small yet significant. Each encounter was a step forward, a delicate dance of getting to know one another while protecting the fragile edges of their hearts. At the cafe, Michelle learned to trust the silences as much as the words. Mitchell's presence was steady, grounding, and she found herself sharing thoughts she had long tucked away, the kind of thoughts one does not reveal lightly. Stories of dreams deferred, of heartbreak carefully hidden, and of the lonely evenings spent watching life pass by without participation. He listened, attentive and compassionate, never interrupting, never offering platitudes, only understanding. One afternoon, as the soft winter sun filtered through the cafe windows, Mitchell reached across the table, his hand brushing against hers. It was a small gesture, almost casual, yet Michelle felt a spark ignite within her. Her breath caught slightly, her fingers tingling at the touch. She looked up, meeting his gaze, and saw in his eyes a reflection of her own cautious excitement, a mirror of the vulnerability they both carried. In that quiet connection, she realized that this was more than companionship. It was recognition, a shared acknowledgement that their lives, long solitary, could now intersect in a meaningful way. As days turned into weeks, their bond deepened. Michelle began to notice the little things: Mitchell's absent-minded habit of stirring his coffee in circles, the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, the subtle kindness in his gestures toward strangers. Each detail, small as it might seem, wove a tapestry of intimacy between them. For Michelle, it was both exhilarating and terrifying. She had built a life of safety and solitude, yet here she was, opening herself to something she had thought impossible: trust, hope, and the possibility of love. Yet fear lingered, shadowing her joy with quiet whispers of doubt. She remembered all too well the disappointment of the past, the countless times she had been overlooked or dismissed. What if this was temporary? What if her heart, finally daring to hope, would be broken again? Mitchell, too, had his own hesitations, scars from previous chapters of life that had taught him caution. And yet, they both persisted, inching forward despite the uncertainty, because the connection they felt was undeniable, and fear seemed a small price to pay for the possibility of something extraordinary. One evening, after sharing a long walk through the softly lit streets dusted with snow, they paused near a park bench overlooking the city skyline. The lights twinkled like distant stars, and the world felt suspended in a moment of quiet magic. Mitchell turned to her, his hand finding hers once more. "I can't imagine my life without you in it anymore," he confessed, his voice low and earnest. Michelle's heart swelled with both fear and joy. "I feel the same way," she admitted, voice trembling. "It scares me." He smiled softly, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Me too, but maybe being scared together is better than being safe and alone." Michelle thought of all the years she had guarded her heart, and all the lonely nights spent in invisible isolation. "Okay," she whispered, a smile breaking through. "Let's be scared together." That night, as they parted ways, Michelle walked home beneath the starry sky, her heart light despite the lingering tremor of fear. She understood, for the first time, that vulnerability was not a weakness but a doorway to connection, and in the quiet of her apartment, she felt a warmth settle in her chest, a fragile but radiant hope that perhaps, just perhaps, life was not done with her yet. The following days carried a new rhythm, a quiet intimacy that neither Michelle nor Mitchell had anticipated. Every meeting, every shared glance, seemed to deepen the bond that had started in the small, cozy coffee shop. It wasn't just conversation anymore. It was a careful weaving of lives, two people learning how to fit together despite years of solitude and hesitation. For Michelle, each moment with Mitchell felt like stepping into sunlight after a long winter, warmth she had almost forgotten existed. One afternoon, they wandered through the city streets, the winter air crisp and fragrant with the scent of pine and fresh snow. Michelle's scarf was wrapped tightly around her neck, and her gloves brushed lightly against Mitchell's as they walked side by side. She felt a sense of safety in his presence, yet also an exhilarating vulnerability. Every word, every smile carried weight now, and she realized how deeply she cared for this man who had quietly entered her life and refused to leave her heart untouched. They stopped at a quiet park, the ground covered in a blanket of snow, streetlights casting a soft golden glow over the scene. Mitchell leaned against a railing, gazing at the city skyline, and Michelle stood beside him, feeling the warmth of his shoulder. "I never expected this," she said softly. "I never thought someone like you, or someone like me, can find this." Mitchell turned to her, his eyes reflecting the same mix of wonder and trepidation she felt. "Maybe we didn't expect it because we were too focused on what we thought we were missing," he replied. "Sometimes the right people find you when you've stopped looking." Michelle's heart swelled with emotion. She thought of the years spent protecting herself, the walls she had built to guard against loneliness. Every act of self-preservation had been a shield, but it had also kept her from experiencing life fully. And now, with Mitchell beside her, she realized that vulnerability could be its own kind of strength. To let someone in, to allow fear to coexist with hope, was not weakness, it was courage, and she felt braver than she had in years. They walked hand in hand, pausing occasionally to watch children play in the snow or couples laughing on the sidewalks. Every little scene, every shared smile reminded Michelle that the world was still capable of beauty and connection. Mitchell's laughter was a balm, soothing the quiet ache that had lingered in her heart for so long. She found herself opening in ways she hadn't expected, sharing not only her dreams, but also the fears that had haunted her nights, the worry that life had passed her by, the concern that love would never find her again. He listened, attentive, gentle, never dismissing her emotions, only holding space for them, for her. That evening they returned to the cafe, their favorite booth waiting for them as if it had always known their story. Mitchell reached across the table, brushing his fingers lightly against hers. "I want to show you something tomorrow," he said, a playful glint in his eyes. Michelle raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "As surprise?" she asked. "Yes," he replied, smiling. "Just trust me." She nodded, her heart fluttering in anticipation. There was a sense of promise in that simple word, trust. It was the foundation upon which everything else would be built, the fragile yet unshakable thread connecting them across the small, bustling cafe. As she walked home later, snow crunching softly beneath her boots, Michelle felt a quiet joy that filled her chest with warmth. Life had not ended for her, as she had once feared. Instead, it had opened a door she hadn't dared to knock on for years. And for the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to imagine a future not defined by loneliness, but connection, possibility, and the courage to embrace whatever might come next. The morning light filtered softly through the curtains as Michelle stirred awake. The previous night's conversation with Mitchell lingered in her mind, warming her like the first rays of sun after a long winter. She dressed carefully, slipping into comfortable clothes that mirrored her quiet confidence, her heart fluttering with anticipation and nervous excitement. Today, Mitchell had promised a surprise, something that would take her beyond the familiar safety of routine and into a shared adventure she could hardly imagine. By the time she reached the door, the world outside was painted in the soft hues of dawn, the streets still glistening from the overnight frost. Mitchell was waiting, his figure framed by the early light, holding the door with a calm patience that made her chest tighten with something like joy. He greeted her with a warm smile, his eyes full of that rare combination of reassurance and excitement. "Are you ready?" he asked gently. She nodded, trusting him, as always. They drove in companionable silence, the city slowly waking around them. Snowflakes clung to the edges of the windshield, sparkling in the morning sun. Michelle watched Mitchell's profile, noticing the faint lines etched by years of experience and care, the quiet strength in his hands on the wheel. There was a gentleness about him, a sincerity that made her feel safe in ways she had never known. Even though a small part of her wondered what awaited them, the rest of her surrendered to the promise of the unknown. They arrived at a quiet overlook on the edge of the city, where the skyline stretched in front of them, glimmering in the soft morning light. Mitchell led her to a bench overlooking the scene, the snow crunching softly beneath their feet. For a moment, they just stood there, side by side, letting the silence speak for them, the world falling away. "I wanted you to see this," he said quietly. "Sometimes you need to step back to realize how far you've come." Michelle glanced around, taking in the expanse, the peaceful beauty of the city bathed in golden light. And in that moment, it felt as if the world itself had paused for them, a perfect, fleeting eternity. As they sat together, hands brushing, hearts quietly sinking, Michelle found the courage to speak the thoughts she had kept locked away for so long. "I've spent so many years protecting myself, but now I feel like I can finally take a risk." Mitchell turned to her, his gaze steady, filled with both understanding and anticipation. "You don't have to protect yourself from me," he said softly. I want to be with you, completely, no matter what fears we carry. They talked for hours, sharing stories of past disappointments and unspoken dreams. Michelle revealed the quiet ache of loneliness that had followed her like a shadow, the nights spent watching life pass by while she remained on the sidelines. Mitchell shared his own fears, the weight of responsibilities, and the moments when he had doubted love could ever be real. Each confession, each shared vulnerability drew them closer, weaving an invisible thread of trust and intimacy that bound them together. Later, as they watched the sunrise over the city, Mitchell leaned closer, brushing a strand of hair from Michelle's face. "I can't imagine my life without you anymore," he whispered. Tears pricked her eyes, but they were tears of relief, of joy, of hope finally realized. "I feel the same way," she admitted, "and it scares me." He smiled softly, his hand covering hers. "Me too, but maybe being scared together is better than being safe and alone." Michelle took a deep breath, feeling the weight of years of loneliness lift from her shoulders. "Okay," she said quietly, her smile radiant. "Let's be scared together." As they walked back to the car, the snow falling lightly around them, Michelle realized that life had finally opened a door she had thought permanently closed. Love, she understood, was not about perfection or timing. It was about courage, about choosing connection even when fear whispered that it was too late. And as she looked at Mitchell, she knew with an unshakable certainty that some beginnings are worth every risk, every trembling step, every moment of uncertainty. Years had passed since that first snow-dusted morning in the quiet coffee shop. Michelle often thought back to that night, remembering how tentative she had been, how carefully she had guarded her heart. And yet, looking at the life she now shared with Mitchell, she could hardly recognize that woman from years ago. The timid, lonely observer had transformed into someone fully alive, someone who had dared to step into the world and embrace the possibilities that life and love offered. Every Christmas Eve, they returned to the same cafe where it all began. The worn wooden booths held a sense of familiarity, a quiet sanctuary where memories lingered in the air like the aroma of freshly brewed coffee. Michelle and Mitchell would sit in their favorite corner, hands intertwined across the table, smiles soft and content. Around them, the city hummed quietly, but for those few hours, it felt as though the world had paused just for them. The cafe had become more than just a place to drink coffee. It had become a symbol of courage, of choices made despite fear. Michelle remembered the first time she had let Mitchell into her life, the hesitancy that had accompanied that trust, the quiet thrill of discovering that someone could truly see her. And now, years later, those memories were no longer tinged with doubt, but with gratitude. She understood that love was never about perfection or timing, it was about recognition, acceptance, and the courage to be vulnerable. Mitchell, across the table, caught her gaze and squeezed her hand gently. His eyes, still filled with warmth and kindness, reflected the depth of years spent learning, growing, and ultimately finding each other. "Do you remember that first Christmas Eve here?" he asked, his voice soft but carrying the weight of history. Michelle nodded, a laugh escaping her lips. "I do. I was so scared," she admitted, "so cautious, so certain that love wasn't for me." He smiled knowingly, a twinkle in his eye. "And yet, here we are, scared together, and somehow better for it." They talked quietly, reminiscing about the small moments that had led them to this point, the first hesitant smiles, the gentle conversations that turned into long walks, the shared fears that slowly became shared joys. Michelle remembered the mornings they had spent exploring the city streets, snow crunching underfoot, the city awakening around them as they discovered the comfort of simply being together. She remembered the park bench overlooking the skyline, where Mitchell had first told her how he could no longer imagine life without her. That moment, once so fragile and uncertain, had grown into a foundation that supported them through every challenge and triumph. Outside the window, soft snowflakes drifted lazily to the ground, mirroring the delicate passage of time. Michelle sipped her coffee and felt a quiet peace settle over her. Life had not been easy, but it had been real, rich, and full. The loneliness she had once carried like a weight had dissolved, replaced by laughter, connection, and a love that deepened with every passing year. She realized now that sometimes the best chapters of life began not when everything was perfect, but when one finally chose courage over safety. Mitchell reached across the table again, brushing a strand of hair from her face, a small, tender gesture that never failed to make her heart flutter. "I still remember thinking you were perfect for me that first night," he said softly. Michelle smiled, feeling the same warmth she had felt years ago, yet stronger, steadier, more profound. "And I still remember thinking you might be the one I had been waiting for all along," she replied, her voice filled with quiet certainty. In that exchange, there was no need for grand declarations, only the quiet, enduring truth of their love. As the evening deepened, the cafe filled with the soft murmur of other patrons, the twinkle of lights reflecting in the windows. Michelle and Mitchell held hands across the table, their fingers intertwined as if sealing a promise made long ago. They talked about the past with gratitude, of the present with contentment, and of the future with hope. Each shared glance, each smile reaffirmed the life they had chosen together, a life built on trust, courage, and the simple joy of being seen. Years of waiting, of protecting hearts, of believing that perhaps love had passed them by, those years had led them here. And now, in the quiet comfort of a snow-covered Christmas Eve, Michelle understood something essential. Sometimes being too old is just another way of saying finally ready. Sometimes the right person finds you not when you expect them, but when you have built the courage to finally let someone in. And sometimes, on a quiet evening in a familiar cafe, two lonely hearts, once afraid, can come together and find exactly what they had been searching for. As they left the cafe that night, hands clasped, hearts aligned, Michelle felt a profound sense of gratitude. Life, with all its twists and turns, had led her here, to love, to trust, and to a partnership that transcended fear. And in that moment, under the soft falling snow and the warm glow of city lights, she knew, with absolute certainty, that the best chapters of her life were just beginning, together with Mitchell, side by side, forever. Life didn't suddenly become perfect for Michelle and Mitchell. There were still ordinary days, small disagreements, and moments of doubt. But what had changed was how they faced everything, together. Where Michelle once walked alone, she now walked with confidence, knowing she was no longer invisible. Love had not erased her past, but it had given it meaning. On quiet evenings, Michelle would sit by the window, watching the city lights glow, her hand resting in Mitchell's. She often thought about the woman she used to be, the one who believed her story had already ended. That version of herself felt distant now, like a chapter she had finally closed with grace. In its place stood someone braver, softer, and stronger than she ever imagined she could be. Mitchell, too, had changed. Success no longer felt empty, and silence no longer felt heavy. Together, they learned that love wasn't about grand moments, but about choosing each other every single day. Small conversations, shared smiles, quiet understanding. And in those ordinary moments, Michelle realized the truth. Love doesn't arrive when life is perfect. It arrives when the heart is ready. Sometimes late, sometimes unexpectedly, but always right on time.